from the next sentence. But in the case of perceptual experience, you don't get that type of syntactical structure. You get a continuous presentation. And that's the point that I'm getting at. That the form of the presentational intentionality gives it a kind of continuousness. I can break it off, but what I do when I break it off is I stop having perceptual experience at all. I close my eyes, or I go to sleep, or I leave and go somewhere else. The presentational intentionality of the visual experience presents the condition satisfactory to me in a continuous and non-discrete fashion. Yeah. At the back, yeah.
You've said that one of the distinctive features of intentionality of perception is the consciousness.
Yeah.
But what about things like, you mentioned skiing and driving, but what about, for instance, dancing?
Yeah.
When I'm dancing, I think that there's a lot of things I have to perceptually control, but I do so unconsciously.
Yeah.
And I actually think that most of our perception is unconscious.
Is unconscious. Yeah. Well, let me talk about this.
Does it mean that
there is a
it's
kind
not
of
intentional?
Sorry.
Does it mean that it is not intentional?
Yeah. The account that I want to give is something like the following. We bring to the perceptual situation, or to indeed any situation, a set of background abilities, a set of ways of doing things, ways of coping with the world, presuppositions about how things work. And our intentional contents typically rise to the level. So if you're a skier, you don't have to think, well, you've got to put the weight on a downhill ski, so if you want to turn that way, you've got to put the weight on this ski, and you want to turn that way, you've got to put the weight on this ski. That's what they tell you when you're first learning how to ski. Okay, but then after you get to be good at skiing, you don't have to think about that. You just think turn left or turn right. Or maybe just think, ski these solemn gates. And by the way, listen to what ski coaches tell racers. If the ski coach has to tell them, now when you want to turn to the left, you have to put the weight on the right ski, and when you want to turn the right, the guy shouldn't be in a race if he has to be told that. What the coaches say are things like, well, I want you to keep your speed in steep, so that when you get into the flats and go into your tuck, you won't slow down too much. I mean, they give you instructions at the level of the background abilities. And by the way, American coaches have all been to university, so they tend to be very intellectual. They'll say things like, I want your elbows closer to your body, you see, and I want you to make a smoother move from foot to foot. Austrian coaches are mostly local peasant boys. And you ask them, well, what am I doing wrong, coach? And they say, schneller. Schneller. Yeah, coach, okay, but what about my Ellenbogen? Coach, tell me about, forget about Ellenbogen. Schneller. This, I think, is why the Austrians tend to beat us. Because, in fact, we over-intellectualize our experiences if we think, well, really, we must be unconsciously planning the move from shifting one weight to the other. I don't think it is. I think it's done automatically, that the intentionality rises to the level of the background ability. Now, that subsidiary movements can be intentional, but they are consequences of the highest level of intentionality, where it's just ski fast. There's a famous movie of Franz Klammer skiing the Innsbruck downhill. And if you want to see intentionality in action, look at that movie. There's no way he could be thinking about the adjustments that his body makes. He has to make 1,000 adjustments. He's going 70 miles an hour, and they'll show you the movement slow motion. That you'll see that his body does make a whole lot of adjustments. But I think the intentional content is things like ski fast, get down the mountain as fast as possible. However, it's a very complex question, because I want to say things that sound inconsistent. I want to say the intentionality rises to the level of the background skill. The intentionality is to answer the question, what do you see? What are you doing? And if I'm asked, what did you see? I'd say, well, I saw a lot of people in a narrow room. But I wouldn't say, well, I saw a series of blotches of color followed by other blotches of color. That takes a level of abstraction. All the same, I want to see though intentionality rises to the level of the background skill, it reaches all the way to the bottom. I did see all of these shirts. It's just that's not the level at which I was perceiving. I was perceiving the level of human beings engaged in philosophical discussion. Other questions?
There was a question.
Yeah.
Well, your analysis was nice and clear, but wouldn't it be necessary to add something about the nature of space and time?
Well, I tried to get to some of that when I marked the indexicality of perceptual experiences. That perceptual experiences are all of the here and now. And we understand here and now as, of course, as opposed to then and there, or future time and place. That is, we hear the indexicality of the spatial and temporal indexicality as against our background knowledge of all sorts of other ways of representing space and time. I think that's right. Now, I don't have a good theory about time, or for that matter, about space, and that's further investigation. So go ahead and do it. Send it to me when you get it done. But I agree. You need more. Say more about space and time.
2 more questions, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Guy here, and then there's a guy at the back. Yeah. You
Okay.
first.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, I must say I admire for your bravery in rescuing naive realism, because myself, I'm just an engineer. Well,
Yeah.
so I must say that like the rest of 6 billion people, I also think that there's nothing more than the naive realism. But the only problem I've got with this is that, I mean, one should not take for granted, or one should not say so easily that there is any causal relation between the outside object which I observe and something in my mind. I mean, you can say there is an immense chain of causal relations on the level of physics between a bunch of molecules, which is actually a chair, and something which goes through that chain into my retina and nerves and whatever. And at the end, there is something in my mind as a chair. But I must not say that, this billions of causal relations equals to one causal relation between my mind and some object outside.
Well, I'm puzzled as to why you are skeptical. So here's me, let's say, I don't know if you can see me, and here's the chair. And the chair, as you say, is a set of molecules, and the chair sends off photons that strike the retina. And then there are complex series of electrochemical stimulus that go back here through the LGN, lateral geniculate nucleus, and then eventually, way back here, or at least at some point in the brain, a conscious visual experience takes place. Now, it's very hard to resist the homunculus fallacy. To think, well, the way it works is there's a little TV set back here, and there's a guy also sitting on a chair. This guy's got the remote, and he watches the TV set. So the stimulus goes to the TV set and produces a picture that the guy watches. Now, you think that's naive, and of course I try to present it as a stupid view, but in fact a lot of very smart people believe something like that. Francis Crick, I used to argue this with him a lot, and he thought there's no way that we can account for the physiology of perception without some kind of a homunculus. There's got to be a homunculus back there keeping his eye on things. And furthermore, there has to be a perceptual experience, which goes on here in the TV set. Now, I think those, which is what we actually observe, and I think that it expresses the same mistake that I'm accusing the philosophical tradition of. Yes, there is a visual experience that occurs back here, but you don't see the visual experience. The visual experience is the way you see the real world. It's not itself the object of perception. The visual experience is experienced. It's not seen. It is the seeing. it's what I try